white supremacy. It is not just a phrase. It is not just a slogan shouted at rallies or scribbled in hate. It is a system, one that has stretched across centuries, shaping the world we live in today. But where did it begin? How did this ideology, this belief that whiteness meant superiority, root itself so deeply into society? Tonight, we travel back through history, through pain, struggle, and resilience to uncover the true roots of white supremacy. This is Black Voices Unchained. White supremacy is not a shadow of the past, nor a relic of history, but a system that has shaped centuries and continues to echo into our present. It is a story written in blood and in silence, in chains and in laws, in whispered lies and shouted violence. To understand where we are today, we must return to the very beginning, to the origins of an ideology that has claimed superiority for some and denied humanity to others. This is the story of white supremacy, how it was born, how it grew, how it adapted, and how it continues to shape the lives of millions across the world. Long before white supremacy existed, Africa was a land of thriving kingdoms and empires. Civilizations like Mali, Songhai, Benin, and Ashanti built societies with systems of trade, governance, art, and education. In Timbuktu, libraries overflowed with manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics. In Benin, intricate bronze sculptures capture the lives of kings and warriors, proof of advanced artistry and skilled craftsmanship. Across the continent, Africans lived in societies rich with culture, language, and tradition. They were farmers, scholars, builders, traders, and spiritual leaders. They were not defined by inferiority, nor destined for enslavement. They were people thriving in their own worlds. But in the 15th century, European powers began their voyages of expansion. Driven by greed and empire, they explored the coast of Africa. At first, the relationship was one of trade, gold, ivory, and spices exchanged for European goods. But greed does not rest, and soon a darker trade emerged. Human beings themselves became the most profitable commodity. The Portuguese were among the first to capture and sell Africans, building forts along the West African coast where men, women, and children were held in dungeons before being forced onto ships. From this, the transatlantic slave trade was born. Over the next 4 centuries, more than 12 million Africans were stolen from their homes and forced onto ships bound for the Americas. The journey itself was hell, known as the Middle Passage. It was a voyage of death and despair. Chained in darkness, packed so tightly that they could barely breathe, millions suffered and died before ever reaching land. Those who survived were sold into lives of slavery in foreign lands. But this was not only an economic system, it was also an ideological one. In order to justify the brutality of slavery, Europeans created lies. They claimed Africans were less than human, that their dark skin marked them as inferior, that God himself had destined them to serve. These lies became the foundation of white supremacy, a justification for greed, a moral shield for exploitation, and a myth to preserve power. In America, the first Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619. From that moment, slavery became the backbone of the colonies. Tobacco, cotton, sugar, and rice all were harvested by enslaved people under unimaginable cruelty. Families were torn apart, children sold, mothers beaten, fathers worked to death. Slavery was not just a labor system. It was a deliberate attempt to strip human beings of dignity, culture, and identity. Yet, even in bondage, enslaved people resisted. Through rebellions, escapes, and acts of quiet defiance, they fought to preserve their humanity. They sang songs that carried secret messages of escape, told stories that preserved African traditions, and risked their lives to break free. Figures like Nat Turner led revolts, while Harriet Tubman became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, guiding hundreds to freedom. Resistance was constant, and though the system was brutal, it never succeeded in crushing the human spirit of those it enslaved. When the Civil War finally ended slavery in 1865, freedom did not bring equality. Instead, white supremacy adapted. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but it left one loophole. Slavery was still legal as punishment for a crime. That loophole gave rise to the prison labor system. Across the South, black men were arrested for smallest offenses: vagrancy, loitering, petty theft, and then forced into labor camps, where conditions mirrored slavery itself. At the same time, new laws called Black Codes and later Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation. Schools, restaurants, buses, and even drinking fountains were divided by race. Black people were denied the right to vote through literacy tests, poll taxes, and intimidation. White supremacy was not hidden. It was carved into law, shouted in the streets, and enforced by terror. That terror often took the form of lynching. Between the late 1800s and mid-1900s, thousands of black men, women, and children were murdered by mobs. These killings were not hidden acts of violence, but public spectacles, often witnessed by large crowds. Photographs of lynchings were sold as postcards, while the victims' families were left in fear and mourning. White supremacy thrived on this terror, using it to keep black communities in fear. Yet, once again, resistance rose. Journalists like Ida B. Wells risked everything to expose a horror of lynching. Organizations like the NAACP began the legal fight to challenge segregation and discrimination. Black voices spoke loudly, refusing to be silenced, even in the face of constant danger. By the mid-20th century, the fight for civil rights had become impossible to ignore. In Montgomery, Alabama, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus. Her act of defiance sparked a year-long bus boycott. Led by a young preacher named Martin Luther King Jr. across the South, sit-ins, marches, and protests challenged the system of segregation. The movement was met with violence. Police unleashed dogs and fire hoses on children, bombed homes and churches, and arrested thousands of peaceful demonstrators. Leaders like King and Malcolm X were assassinated for daring to demand equality. But the sacrifices were not in vain. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 struck down legal segregation and protected the right to vote. On paper, white supremacy had been defeated, but in reality, it only shifted form. Instead of segregation signs, it lived in systemic inequality. Instead of lynchings, it lived in mass incarceration and police brutality. The war on drugs in the 1980s targeted black communities, sending millions to prison for nonviolent offenses. Crack cocaine, which devastated inner cities, carried harsher penalties than powder cocaine, which was more common in white suburbs. The result was clear. Black families were torn apart, children left without parents, communities destabilized. Today, the effects remain. The average white household holds nearly 10 times the wealth of the average black household. Black men are imprisoned at 5 times the rate of white men. Police violence disproportionately targets black people, with names like Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd etched into collective memory as reminders of the cost of systemic racism. But alongside the pain runs another current, the current of resistance. From the earliest rebellions on slave ships to the marches of the Civil Rights era, to the global movement of Black Lives Matter today, black voices have never been silent. They have sung through oppression, written through injustice, marched through danger, and spoken truth to power. They have created music, art, literature, and culture that has shaped the entire world. White supremacy may claim superiority, but history shows otherwise. The resilience of black people, the brilliance of black culture, and the power of black resistance have always outshone the lies of oppression. The story of white supremacy is long and brutal, but it is not the only story. Alongside it runs a story of survival, of strength, of unbroken dignity. And as long as those stories are told, white supremacy cannot truly win. For every chain forged, there has been a hand ready to break it. For every lie spoken, there has been a voice ready to tell the truth. The roots of white supremacy may stretch back centuries, but the roots of resistance run just as deep. And when truth is spoken, when voices rise, when history is remembered, those roots of resistance grow stronger than any system of oppression. This is the legacy. This is the struggle. This is a truth unchained. This is Black Voices Unchained. Don't forget to subscribe for more.